Immigration to Canada is the process by which people migrate to Canada to reside permanently in the country. For several years now, Canada has been accepting about 250,000 new permanent residents every year. For people with skills, work experience, and good standard of English or French, qualifying for residence is not a huge barrier. But immigration is becoming harder and harder day by day. In nutshell, we need people, but lots of hidden clause, continuous changing in rules, creating a confusion and frustration among people from every category. Student visa holders, work visa holders, educated PRs, PRs seeking citizenship, family class spousal visas, visitor visas, poof, you name it. Problem and confusion is everywhere. No one is happy at their end. Today I have got an opportunity to talk to the person and to get the first-hand information that what exactly is going in immigration in Canada. I got your tons of inbox messages and your text, and I will assure you to get all one by one with Deputy Prime Minister and Citizenship and Immigration Minister of Canada, Honorable Jason Kenney, my guest today. Welcome, Minister.
Pleasure, thank you.
Minister, how do you feel being a part of the most interesting, most confusing, the most vague department of federal government when people expect a lot, but you have to limit or quota everywhere?
Well, it's a fascinating challenge. I feel honored to be responsible for what is perhaps the most important ministry in the federal government because it's all about our future. It's about maintaining what is the largest immigration program in the world in relative terms. And it's about making sure that we keep fair rules and attract those people who are going to help us build a more prosperous Canada. So it has its challenges and its frustrations, but it's also it's a hugely interesting portfolio where you deal with real people and their lives.
What is the 13-year timeline in family class? Federal Liberals bashed a lot as it was their campaign tool, but what exactly is this? Will it take 13 years to bring my parents in Canada now on?
No. What the Liberals did when they were in power was to neglect Canada's immigration system through incompetence and mismanagement. In fact, when they were removed from office in 2006, they left behind a backlog of almost 1 million people with applications in our immigration system, including 110,000 parents and grandparents waiting for their family sponsorship applications. So when we came to office, we inherited those huge backlogs and long processing times. In fact, it was taking 64 months when we came to office for parents and grandparents' applications to be processed. We took action. We've managed to reduce some of the backlogs, such as for skilled workers, and we've managed to reduce processing times somewhat, including for parents and grandparents, down to 58 months on average. What we announced in the campaign is that our government will develop an action plan for faster family sponsorship after consulting with immigrant communities and experts. We're going to see how can we reduce the backlog of applicants so we can speed up the processing time. I don't want people waiting for years for their family members to come in the country.
Talking about Liberals, how did you manage to change ethnic vote bank in favor of Conservatives from Liberals?
Well, you know, it used to be that most new Canadians voted Liberal for no particularly good reason. It was just a habit, and the Liberals did a good job of reaching out to new Canadians and cultural communities and developing relationships. Conservatives didn't used to be as good at that. But the main thing we did was very simply to encourage new Canadians and members of cultural communities to vote for their values. The basic insight that Stephen Harper and I had was that most new Canadians are basically conservative in their values, in the way they live their lives, with a tremendous work ethic, with a sense of entrepreneurship, that so many small businesses get started by new Canadians, with a opposition to high taxes and burdensome government regulation, with support, deep support for the family as the basic institution of society, deserving the respect and support of government rather than the hostility of government. Respect for tradition, respect for religious faith, respect for law and order. These are basic conservative values, and so our insight was we just need new Canadians to vote in accordance with their values. If they do so, they're more likely to vote conservative than not, and indeed in the May election we appear to have won the support of new Canadians with about a 20 percentage point plurality over the Liberals. And we won most of the constituencies in Canada, a majority of whose residents are immigrants to Canada.
Minister, while talking about parents, some of our elderly parents don't want to stay permanently in Canada, but want to visit us. But when we apply them for a visit, mostly visitor visas are denied. Why so? Why don't we a little lenient and give them 5 or 10 years multi-entry visas to stop the hassle again and again?
Well, first of all, I actually have directed our officials, our visa officers, to grant multiple entry visas for as long as possible to parents, to people who have an application for parental sponsorship, wherever possible. But people still have to go through the visa application process. They still have to prove to the visa officer, according to our law, that they are likely to go back to their country of origin. And so we cannot guarantee 100% acceptance. Now, I can tell you that the vast majority of visitor visa applications by people with a parental sponsorship application in our system are approved. The significant majority are. I think it's about 2/3. I'm sorry for the other 1/3 that do get disappointed. And I made a commitment in the election that I would look at alternate approaches to our visitor visa system, and I'm willing to take a fresh look at something like a bond system to guarantee someone's return, and perhaps other approaches. We can never guarantee all people will get the visa, but we want people who intend to respect Canada's immigration laws to be able to come to Canada.
Minister, according to new rules on spousal cases, people will be eligible for permanent residence after 2 years stay in Canada with their spouse. Then they'll be called for an interview for permanent PR. Don't you think that it will be an extra burden on immigration? Especially nowadays when visitor visas are 4 to 5 months behind. How can you assure that 2-year time period won't be 3, 4 or 5 years? And it won't be due to your intentions, but due to backlogs.
Yes, good question. Well, first of all, I was contacted a couple of years ago by some of the thousands of victims of immigration marriage fraud, of marriages of convenience, people whose hearts had been broken and often whose finances had been destroyed by people they married from overseas, where the marriage was just a means of getting to Canada rather than starting a new life with their Canadian spouse. And so I held public consultations. Thousands and thousands of people participated online. They wrote in with their suggestions. We had town hall meetings across the country, and almost everyone in those consultations said that we should do the same thing as United Kingdom, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and bring in some form of conditional status for sponsored foreign spouses for their initial period of residency in Canada. So the rule in the future will be that a sponsored foreign spouse will not be guaranteed permanent residency until they've been here for 2 years. And if in that period the Canadian sponsoring spouse says, no, this person never came and lived with me, they showed up at the airport, they took off, they never intended the marriage, then we'll look at the case closely. And if it's proven that the foreigner was exploiting the Canadian, then we will not process their permanent residency. As to your second question, it will not take, it'll be automatic. If there is no report against the foreign sponsored spouse, they will automatically get their permanent residency. So there won't be any delays in all of that. I should finally point out that the foreign sponsored spouse will have a 5-year bar on being able to divorce, and turn around and sponsor someone else in the country. We all know so well the cases. Someone comes, divorce, marry someone else for money, divorce, marry someone else. We're going to stop it. It's over. We're sending a message to those who break hearts and our laws. You should not come to Canada if that's your intention.
What is the timeline of getting citizenship these days? People are in line after applying for citizenship over 2 years. Any major changes happening?
Yes. I tasked my department with speeding up the processing time for citizenship. It does take too long. I make no excuses for that. The reason is just this, that we have so many people applying. Canada has the highest percentage of immigrants who go on to become citizens of any country in the developed world. About 85% of our immigrants go on to become citizens. And because our government has increased immigration levels, there are just that many more people applying for citizenship. In fact, since our government took office in 2006, we have sworn in about 1 million new Canadian citizens. Imagine, that's like adding the entire province of Saskatchewan or Manitoba into the Federation in terms of new citizens. We're proud of that, but it's just the numbers, it's the sheer volume. We ask people to be patient, and I'm encouraging my department to think more like a business. How can we provide better service, perhaps charging people a little bit extra to go faster in the system, hire more staff? We're looking at management and operational changes to reduce the waiting times and speed up the processing.
Minister, some rules and timelines are very illogical and don't make sense. Like if you have to extend your visitor visa, it takes almost 6 months, and it takes longer to extend your work permit with the same employer instead of new one. And it takes 15 months to renew in-home caregiver visa. Why it's like that?
You know, the answer for all of these questions about long processing times is again, it's very simply a question of the volume, the numbers, the huge numbers. So, for example, we've seen the number of nannies, live-in caregivers, coming to Canada more than double in the past 6 years. Many of them are coming out of Philippines. Manila's become our busiest immigration office in the world. 32,000 permanent residents a year being put through that office. And it's just difficult for us to do everything all at once. The good news is this. Canada is welcoming more immigrants than ever before. Our government has on average welcomed 254,000 new permanent residents per year. We are welcoming the equivalent of 0.8% of our population as immigrants, meaning that we have the highest relative level of immigration in the developed world. Last year, we welcomed 281,000 permanent residents, the highest level in 6 decades. And so the volumes are just so huge. It's hard to keep up with the many applications that we get. We recognize, though, that it's not fair to have people waiting for years, which is why, for example, we implemented our action plan for faster immigration in the skilled worker category, because when the Liberals left office, they left behind a backlog of over 500,000, taking 7 years to process. Here's the good news. We've managed to cut that backlog by a quarter, and now new applicants in that skilled worker program are getting an answer in less than a year rather than more than 6 years. This is a model that I would like to apply to the various other programs, including caregivers, parents, and others, to speed up the processing times by limiting the number of incoming applications that we have to process. I'm sorry that's a technical answer, but I want to give you the real facts.
According to conservative policies, number of temporary workers have increased significantly over permanent immigrants. Why don't we put system in place and make it easy for them to become permanent soon?
Well, there are some myths on this because, in fact, as I've told you, we actually increased permanent immigration. Last year, for example, we received 281,000 permanent residents to Canada. These are people most of whom will go on to become citizens. In terms of temporary foreign workers, we issued 185,000 work permits last year. So the number of immigrants is far, far more than the number of temporary foreign workers. And many of those work permits are for students in Canada. For example, we have given all foreign students open work permits while they're doing their studies, and a 2-year open work permit when they're done their studies. Now they can transition into permanent residency through our new program called the Canadian Experience Class, as can high-skilled temporary foreign workers. We've also expanded massively the provincial nominee program from 5,000 per year to 45,000 per year. This has been really good in helping get more immigrants to Alberta and the Prairie and Atlantic provinces. Much better distribution of immigrants, resulting in a doubling of immigration levels to Alberta. And this is a program which is more flexible. It responds to local and regional labor market needs. It allows skilled tradespeople and semi-skilled people to become permanent residents, unlike the Liberal government's complete reliance on the federal skilled worker program, which was limited to people with university education and high levels of language proficiency. So I would argue that our system is actually, not only are we accepting more immigrants, but it's also more flexible.
As you mentioned PNP, why are provinces not allowed to determine their needs and immigration requirements instead of imposing quotas on them? Why is there so much differentiation in between Quebec and rest of the Canada?
Well, there's a long history in the Canadian Federation of Quebec having its own arrangements. This was an agreement that was struck back in 1990 with Canada, between the federal government and the Quebec government, that allows them to choose their own economic immigrants. But look, I believe that immigration and citizenship are about building a strong Canada. It's about nation building. It's about our future. And I don't want to end up with 10 separate provincial immigration systems all operating in different silos. I want us all to come into everyone who comes here as first and foremost as Canadians. And that's, after all, when you're overseas, you don't say, hey, I want to be an Albertan or an Ontarian. You say, I want to be a Canadian. And I think we must maintain that focus in our immigration program. Now, we've given more flexibility and more space to the provinces by far than any government in our history to participate in selecting immigrants through our huge expansion of the provincial nominee program, going from 5,000 provincial nominees six years ago to 45,000 coming in this year. And you know what? Those numbers don't come from out of nowhere. We had to give up that space in the federal skilled worker program. We handed over 40,000 immigration positions from Ottawa to Alberta and the other provinces so that they could choose people who would succeed in their local economies. And we're proud of that. But there are limits. There are limits. I mean, like I said, we have the highest levels of immigration in Canadian history, the highest levels in the developed world. But there are practical limits, A, to how many people we can put through the immigration system, and B, how many people we can house and bring into our healthcare system, how many kids can be accommodated in our schools. And there are public limits to acceptance of immigration. We have the most pro-immigration political consensus of any Western democracy. I want to keep it that way. I don't want people to wake up one day and say, what do you mean all of a sudden we have 500,000 immigrants coming to the country? That's too high. We need to absorb people. We need to integrate them. We need to make sure they have good jobs. And so when people say, oh, put more provincial nominees, make all the temporary foreign workers permanent, increase parents and grandparents, increase that, increase this. Well, guess what? It all adds up to massive increases in immigration levels that I don't think we could absorb or would be accepted to the public. So I have to be realistic about these things.
I have asked this question to every concerned authority at provincial and federal level, but haven't seen any progress yet. That's the issue of foreign credentials. How can we expedite the process and get those people into proper workforce, into the field of their own choice?
That's a great question, and something that the Harper government has been very focused on. First, your viewers know that credential recognition is a provincial responsibility. I know this is frustrating because we invite people in based on their degrees and their education.
But when I'm asking this question to provincial people, they are saying that this is federal.
Well, I can't believe they say that because they know that's not true. When it's true that we invite people in based in part on an assessment of their degrees and their professional skills. But if you want to become a doctor in Alberta, you don't apply to the Government of Canada. You apply to the Alberta College of Physicians and Surgeons. If you want to be an engineer in Saskatchewan, there's no federal organization.
So I think there's a problem in streamlining of province and federal.
Well, it's a streamlining of provinces.
Yeah.
Each province has about 45 regulated professions, each of which have their own self-governing bodies, the College of Physicians, the engineers, the Law Society, etc. 10 provinces, each with 45 bodies. That means there are 450 professional licensing bodies from coast to coast. What we are trying to do as a federal government is to play a kind of facilitative role. We're trying to help bring all provinces and all professions to the same table to hammer out a faster, simpler, streamlined process for credential recognition. We're exercising real leadership for the first time ever. Even though it's not our constitutional responsibility, we feel a moral and political responsibility to do what we can to help foreign trained professionals to be able to work in their chosen field. Here in Canada, we're investing $50 million into the hard, detailed work of hammering out a faster, streamlined process for credential recognition, the objective of which is to give people an answer about within a year of their application so they don't have to go through endless red tape.
Minister, human smuggling has always been a problem. And now in light of Tamil refugees who came in shiploads, how do you plan to handle that?
We think it's a serious problem because in order to maintain public support for our generous immigration and refugee programs, we must demonstrate that queue jumping and paying human smuggling criminals will not be tolerated. And I think most new Canadians are strongest about this. They've come through the legal system. They wait patiently for their family members to come, and they think it's an insult to watch people pay $40,000 or $50,000 to a criminal gang to be smuggled into Canada ahead of the immigration queue, which is why we have taken strong enforcement action in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, and most recently Indonesia, to interrupt and stop the smuggling operations targeting Canada. It's also why we have introduced legislation to crack down on human smuggling that would remove some of the incentives for people to pay for to be smuggled to Canada. We call upon the opposition parties to support what we think is strong but reasonable human anti-smuggling legislation.
I've heard of the plans to limit application for permanent immigration to 250,000 per year. Minister, what would be the criteria of accepting and rejecting these applications? Time-based, point-based, education, what it would be?
Well, our planning range for immigration is 240 to 265,000. Like I mentioned last year, we accepted 281,000, which was a bit of an exception. There are many, many programs within that. Skilled worker, provincial nominee, Quebec has its own selection, family reunification, refugees, etc. And so right now I've launched some national consultations, and I would like to invite your viewers to provide their input. In August, we will be launching online consultations at our website, Citizenship and Immigration Canada, which is cic.gc.ca. They will be able to tell us what they think is the right mix. What percentage should be economic immigrants? Of that group, what percentage should be provincial nominees versus federally selected? Do they think we should change the point system for the skilled worker program? If so, how? One thing we're looking at doing is allowing skilled tradespeople who may not have university degrees to come through the skilled worker program, and also lowering the language requirement for them. So there's a lot of different questions that we're seeking public input from, so that as we formulate our immigration plan for the next few years.
Minister, multiculturalism is a subject of debate in the developed world. When a lot of world leaders, including British Prime Minister, had declared it is a total failure in their country. What do you think? How are we doing in Canada?
I think that our experience is different than that of Western Europe on diversity, immigration, and multiculturalism, if you will. In most Western European countries, there are large areas of what people will call ethnic enclaves or parallel communities or ghettos, where people are not integrating. One reason is that they have not enjoyed the same opportunities, employment and perhaps educational opportunities, and have faced some degree of social exclusion. On the other hand, it could also be said that some of those people have opted out. They haven't made a real hard effort to integrate into the broader society. Happily, here in Canada, we have a much better experience. While things are far from perfect for immigrants and members of minority communities, it's a pretty open country with equality, generally speaking, equality of opportunity. And if you work hard, you can get ahead. And immigrant families know that, especially through education. They know if their child has a good education that they have a fair shot at a really good economic future. So, and also, I think most, not all, but most immigrants to Canada are more deliberate than in, say, Western Europe about integrating into the broader society. Yes, in our Canadian tradition of multiculturalism, they want to maintain pride in what's best about their own cultural backgrounds and traditions, but not at the expense of at the same time becoming Canadian and respecting Canadian traditions, cultural norms, and laws. So I think here we have a much better balance. My main point, though, is we should not take that for granted. We must be very careful and very deliberate in ensuring equality of opportunity for newcomers, and at the same time encouraging them to make a real effort to integrate. And when they hit challenges or barriers, when they can't find the good job, don't give up. Don't retrench. Don't just live in a community that is like your country of origin. Reach out. Meet Canadians from other backgrounds. Yes, improve your English or French language skills. Make sure your kids do the same. And it's by making that real effort that we will succeed in the future and continue to be seen as a model in terms of diversity.
As talking to you, what my understanding is that there is a lack of education and huge communication gap between general public and your department. How people should be educated about the clear and transparent policies of Immigration Department of Canada?
Immigration is a complicated area.
I know.
And what I'm trying to do actually right now is sort of launch on a bit of public education campaign so people understand the difficult choices we have to make. I would encourage people to visit our website, cic.gc.ca. A lot of good information there. But I think the more important thing, rather than understanding the technical details of immigration policy, is for people to have what I call civic literacy. That is to say, a knowledge of the values, symbols, history, and institutions of our country. That's why we've improved the test for new citizens and the study guide that supports it called Discover Canada, which is available as well on our website or in printed form. It's a very nice and fairly short summary of Canadian history, values, symbols, and our democratic institutions. And I think that should be the starting point. People should read that document. We have an audio guide, and it gives them a good understanding of the Canada to which they now belong.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.